listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Elliot Rowe and Dr. Tricia Gardner.
Welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Thanks to our sponsor, bbpokertables.com. So, Tricia, what do you have for us this week?
Well, a new study just came out, and I'm talking hot off the presses, January 2016, and it's in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. And I know that one thing that me and you talk about with our clients is how important sleep is to optimal brain function. What is exciting about this new piece of research is they found 3 food types that are specifically linked to you getting the most restorative sleep. So I know everybody wants to know, well, what are these 3 food types? Because if you eat more of them, you're going to sleep better. They are fiber. So you got to get more fiber in your diet, which means fruits and vegetables. Eating saturated fats was linked with poor sleep. So you want to get rid of saturated fats. That's things like, hot dogs, bacon, beef, anything like that. And then the third thing is low sugar intake also is good for your sleep. So if you're getting a lot of sugar and a lot of the bad fats, you're going to sleep terribly. So you want to put those 3 things together. And what they found specifically is by designing the diet this way, people fell asleep in half the time and they had deeper, more restorative sleep. So there you go.
So is it more REM sleep?
Exactly. Well, what's interesting, and I don't think a lot of people know this, is if you're under a lot of stress, it actually disrupts the deep, slow wave sleep that you have. So your sleep will be not as good. You'll be, restless and maybe waking up a lot, and you just don't get that deep sleep. So when you wake up, you're still going to be tired.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. And I mean, effectively, they're recommending a very healthy diet, aren't they?
Effectively. So it kind of goes with what we're always saying. You've got to eat right. You've got to exercise. You've got to sleep well. But the more we get, factual scientific data, I think the more exciting it becomes, because it's not just a myth or an old wives' tale.
Yeah, it's no longer anecdotal, is it?
Exactly.
It makes complete sense. Sense. So there you go, everyone. Eat healthy, sleep well.
Exactly.
Make more money at the poker table. That's
exactly.
So this week we've got Paul Internet Otto coming on. He's a coach on Ivy League, and he also runs a website called The Poker Market. So we're going to give him a call now and talk to him. So let's give him a call. So Paul, thanks for coming on the show. If you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hey Elliot, thanks for letting me on the show. I'm Paul, aka Internet. I'm an online poker pro, have been for a couple of years. Specialize on 6 max, no limit, a little bit of heads up, and I'm ready for some questions.
Awesome. So we're excited to have you join us. Just so our listeners can get a little bit more background on you, can you tell us a little bit about your poker market and kind of what you're doing with that these days?
Right, so my poker career has been pretty long. I've been coming up from like the lowest levels of free rolls and then the small stakes and then the higher stakes. And now about 2 years ago, we started a new project, which is called a Poker Market. It's pokermarket.com. And I spend a lot of time on the website doing videos, being on the forums, doing all that sort of stuff.
With the Poker Market, it also allows people to buy action, doesn't it, in other players?
Yeah, so we have a lot of things going on the site. No, very few people on the site actually use all of it. There's so much you can do. So one of the main things is there's a staking platform, which is for people to buy and sell action. So if you're playing in the World Series and the buy-in is a bit steep, or you want to sell action to friends or strangers, both alike, you can use our platform. It's much easier than doing it on a forum. There's a lot more going on. Another part of the website is a marketplace, which is for digital poker content. So this is great for both players and producers. So let's say you're a producer, right, Elliot? You have a lot of
cool. I think I've got some of my own products on there, I think.
Yes, you do. So you have product you want to sell, and we're working as the intermediary to trying to get that stuff out there for people to buy. And as a poker player, as a poker enthusiast, you can check out a marketplace. There's videos about all sorts of topics in, I think at this point, like 5 or 6 languages. So that even for some of the foreigners, there's some cool stuff in there in the marketplace. That's part of it. And then there's 2 more sites, 2 more parts to the site. One is a big forum. There's English, German, a little bit of Portuguese action going on as well, where you can just talk about anything. There's a lot of great strategy content around. And then the last section is the poker deals. Of course, we're trying to get people the highest rakebacks, refer them to the best sites, all that sort of stuff.
So who does your site primarily cater to, like, players in which countries, what types of stakes, that sort of thing?
As a site, we don't discriminate against anyone. Anyone can come to our site and check it out. We have offers for beginners and people who are just, starting up, have been playing for maybe a year, have been on or off. So we have some free money offers, some starting guides, some, how to be successful in online poker sort of stuff. But then we also have a lot of content which is specifically for professional players. So the guys who have been playing professionally for years and they're looking to stay up to date on all the newest developments. So we have a lot of things like that. So it's really anyone can find some stuff. If you're just looking to, invest in some famous players in the staking marketplace, you can just hop in, put $5 on whoever you think is the best Twitch streamer and do that. But if you're a veteran and you're going to have like amazing strategy content, you'll find stuff that helps you. You can sell your stuff if you like.
Wow, this is like comprehensive.
Yes, so we're trying to do all of it.
And so just back to your poker career, you said you started at the free rolls, and I know you now play up to the 2K. We focus a lot on mindset. How important has your mindset been in the development of you as a player?
I think mindset is one of those fundamentals which if you don't get it right, you're just not going to be successful. Poker is a very demanding game. If you go wrong, it's not like you can apologize the next day. Like if you do something bad, your money is gone. You're not going to get it back. So it's very, very important that you have a strong and mindset always.
What are some of the biggest mindset leaks that you've seen? Because I know you've done a lot of coaching through the years as well.
Yes, I do quite a bit of coaching. I see mindset-wise, well, there's just a lot of different things. I'm not, you guys are the experts on mindset. But one thing is, of course, the bankroll management and the dealing with moving up and moving down stakes. I find a lot of people are very eager to move up stakes and very reluctant to move down stakes. And if you want to move up quickly, you need to be prepared to move down quickly. And that can be something people have really big problems dealing with. Other mindset issues, I think just in general, the disconnection from the money is sort of important in poker. Like you can't be sitting there thinking about, I bet $50, but instead I could do that with that $50. You can't have that sort of thing. It's maybe more of a, something you learn in the first couple of years, but still it does affect people when they're like, oh man, this is such a big bet. I don't know if I should really do it.
Yeah, it can be really difficult for people. When it's a car, they're winning or losing in a hand. It can be very significant. And if you are moving up to those higher stakes, you really have to view it as a utility. The money's a utility in the game rather than view it as money in real life, because it's just incredibly difficult to play your best poker if every time you go all in a hand, you're turning it into real life things.
Yes. No, I always, when I look at hands or analyze hands, I always convert everything into big blinds. So doesn't matter if it's a very low micro stakes hand or a very high stakes hand. I'll just say, okay, the open raise is 3 big blinds and this is what happens after it. Because what the actual money is doesn't matter for the strategic opponent or for what the best play is.
I kind of want to follow up with that and ask you, this is sort of open-ended, but what is your experience around the mindset of downswings?
I think downswings are one of the toughest things to deal with for most players. I'm not really an expert on dealing with downswings. I usually recommend people to switch something up when they're feeling bad. Like you want to get out of this sort of depressive mindset where even before you start playing, you already feel like it's not going to work out. And one way to get out of that trough is perhaps to switch something up, just move down a stake, switch to a different site, change your layout, play on a different monitor, anything which makes you not feel like, oh, this is the same thing again where I'm just going to lose again. Mm-hmm. It's usually what I recommend. But
in terms of things like the importance of sleep, of exercise, of things like that, do you think that's important for the poker player, or do you think not so much?
Well, I guess that's just important in life. So I think, of course, it's very important that you get enough sleep and you don't play poker when you're not feeling well. I personally only play poker like at higher limits when I feel 100% in shape, like when I've had a good breakfast and I'm relaxed. I'm not someone who like jumps into a game when they're not feel good ever, because I think that's just doesn't work out ever. So I think exercise, good eating, good sleeping, those are all necessary to, be a good person, which is necessary to be a good poker player.
Is that something that came naturally to you, or is it something that kind of evolved as you got more, into the game and more experience with it?
Now you're making me reflect on myself, which I'm very uncomfortable doing. But I do remember distinctly a time at when I was in university, and my friends there, my colleagues, they were asking me to join them for drinks, and I was like, no, I rather don't do that. And people were like, why not? And I'm like, well, because I don't want to use my brain like that. And I guess that has been certainly connected to poker a little bit, but maybe not primarily because of poker.
So it's always there to some extent.
Yes.
And in terms of, from what you've seen in terms of at the live tables when you've been at the World Series, or stories you've heard from your friends in poker, have you ever seen one of these sort of very huge examples of tilt at the table where, friends or associates have gone through rolls or smashed up their house or anything along those lines? Any sort of extreme stories that you can remember hearing?
I've lived with a couple poker players just on and off, just some roommate things, and I consider myself very lucky that I've never had to witness someone punch a monitor or throw a keyboard through the room, but I've heard a lot of stories like that. So that does happen. Of course, there's the occasional, scream or so, but I've not had the extremes of that, at least in my vicinity. People busting through rolls, dropping a lot of binds because they're playing badly. Some of my opponents certainly sometimes do that. But any friends, I guess there's one or two stories which are maybe not very extreme, but go in the direction of the last couple binds you could have saved sort of thing, yes.
So you go out for the World Series in the summertime?
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about kind of how that's different from like your day-to-day online playing experience? Because some of our listeners, maybe they're planning to go to the series for the first time and they've been primarily online players.
Right. I wouldn't consider myself a World Series veteran, but I do have some thoughts on it. The play style in the live scene is very different from the online scene, so I needed a long time to get used to it. People would just use different lines with different hands that I was not used to. People would judge different things very differently. Like they would, be much more, as an example, when a flush hits, they'd be much more passive and just give people credit for the flush, even if it made absolutely no sense. So there's a lot of very, very subtle differences, which can have a huge impact. In terms of actual advice, I guess it's just don't expect yourself to make the best plays from the get-go. Get there, get used to playing live, maybe start with some lower games and just get used to the experience.
Yeah, I agree on that point because I can remember the first time I went to the series and it was so drastically different, especially in terms of the passive versus aggressive, whereas online you might have been aggressive, where live I would see people taking much more passive lines and it was a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I agree. Especially in the tournaments, a lot of people there, they don't want to put in a lot of their chips. They just want to wait and see if they can win somehow with not doing anything. That's very true.
What about the switch between, obviously, predominantly a cash game player, going to go and play some tournaments live? Is that a big change for you as well, the switch between cash and MTTs? Or do you still sometimes find yourself playing MTTs online as well?
Well, I do occasionally play MTTs online, but it's a completely different brand of poker. There's a very different skill set required, specifically deep stacks, short stacks. There's different bet sizing plans. There's different ranges you need to know. So I think anyone who's a winning online cash game player is certainly going to be a winning tournament player, but they're going to be very far from playing the tournaments optimally. So I do consider them fairly different games, much like Heads Up or Six Maxes. If, you first play some Heads Up, you think, oh, it's just the same game, just do the same things. But no, it's very different.
Since you have so much experience, like on the coaching side, I want to ask you something about that because we have a wide range of listeners from people who are just getting started with poker to people who, are very advanced. So for the people who are maybe, just getting started, beginner, intermediate, what do you think is the ideal way for them to learn poker, no matter what variant they're playing?
That's a very good question. So I think one of the most important things for learning anything is that you set yourself up with a more rigid schedule than you maybe think at first. So don't be like, oh, I want to learn this, but I'll do it tomorrow. Like, that's not the way it works. The way it works is you say, okay, every Friday I want to, spend 1 hour on the forums, or every week I'm going to watch 5 videos on this poker training site, or every month I'm going to read 2 poker books. You need to set yourself up with some sort of learning regimen or some sort of goals that you're actively trying to achieve. And what's the best resource to start out with? It depends on the player type and the game type, I imagine. I think for a lot of poker, there's a lot of great books that have been written about it. So I would usually recommend people that are new or at least not super deep in the poker scene to just check out all the books that are out there. They're very cheap. They're very good. If you can, read in a couple hours what someone has been written up over years, like that's just tremendous value for a couple bucks.
Yeah, agreed. And then when do you think they make the transition to a training site?
Right, so training sites are when you're a little bit further up there, like when you've read all the books, once you're into your first couple books and you understand all of that and you're on the forums and you start to pick up the language and you understand the basic concepts, that way when you should join a training site. Now, a lot of training sites out there, they have the subscription-based model where you pay monthly to watch however many videos they have on the site. On Poker Market, on our site, it works a bit differently. It's just you buy individual videos or individual packages just on a one-off basis. So you only buy the stuff you're interested in. You don't have to buy, a subscription where you probably pay over months because you're too lazy to cancel.
And then sort of the next stage up, so if someone is reaching the sort of the higher levels, mid to high stakes, how would you recommend they look to work on and improve their game?
Right. So once you're beating the micro stakes and the small stakes, you already made the biggest step. Like that is much more difficult than you might think at first. And once you're at that level, you can only improve by talking to other good players. So you need to be on the forums, find people that are like-minded, find people in your area perhaps, move in with them or at least meet online regularly. And then, of course, one of the big things is to find a coach that you connect with that explains the game well, that explains concepts well, and perhaps doesn't drain your wallet too much in the process.
That's like a unicorn, right?
Yes, all of those together, that's the risk-free, high-reward investment, yes.
That's great. So you kind of mentioned there, and I want people to really take this home because I don't think it's talked about all that much. You said beating the micro and the small stakes is probably harder than most people imagine. Can you kind of say something about, why that is?
Well, there's two reasons for it, which is these days the online poker micro stakes is extremely competitive, extremely tough. There's a lot of professionals or semi-professionals playing them. And the second reason is the rake is incredibly high. So the poker sites sort of hide that fact very well that you don't really notice. But if you're playing on PokerStars on a no limit 10 Zoom pool, you're paying so much rake. It's incredible. Like beating the games beyond the rake is a really big achievement.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really are expecting when they start to be blasting through sort of the micro stakes. They expect it to be very easy. So I think it's really good you pointed that out because, as you said, it takes an awful lot of work to just get through to that next level. Now, in terms of your game and what you do, how do you work on your own game right now? Is it just the sort of the getting extra coaching and talking to friends, or do you do other things as well?
Well, these days I have a coaching group. So there's a couple of players I work with very closely. I'm like the head coach sort of thing. And they're very smart people. And they ask me really tough questions all the time. And then sometimes I know the answers or I find a pretty quick answer. But sometimes I'm like, I never thought about it from that perspective. And then I go back into the cave and I run the numbers and I do some math and I do some thinking and maybe I ask some other friends. And that's very motivating to have someone ask you something and you just don't know. These days, one of the most advanced softwares which are out there is called solvers, post-flop solvers. There is 3 programs which are all sort of doing the same thing. One of them is called PioSolver. One of them is called Simple Postflop. That's the one I'm using. And there's also an online web service which is called GTO Range Builder. And with those programs, you can nowadays learn a lot about the game very quickly. They're very comprehensive programs. And yeah, they let you figure out stuff much more quickly than before.
In the live setting, and I don't know how much this is true in the online setting because I'm in America and, we have some limitations on that. But at least in the live setting, I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm just not good at math or I'm just not a math-based player. I play by feel. Mm-hmm. What kind of advice would you give to those players in order to, really get after this and, get into the math of the game?
And without going too far off topic, I hear this a lot when I talk to just acquaintances, anyone. I tell them, I do some math type stuff, and they're like, "Oh no, I don't do math. It's not my thing." And to me, it always feels like they're taking something away from themselves, which they shouldn't be. Like anyone can do math or can use math concepts. Everyone does use them subconsciously, and just telling yourself, "Oh, you can't do that. You're not good at that." You really shouldn't do that. You should just be, well, there's some stuff I can do, some stuff I can't do, and the ones I can't do, I want to get better at. So I think people really prohibit themselves from learning just by this, like, "Oh, math is just not my thing," and they just discard it completely. Otherwise, as advice for people who consider themselves more feel players, so I would just use the scientific method in saying that what sort of feelings do you have? How do you, measure those? How do you put those into words and just try to work from that sort of angle? And you will naturally get into a analytical, mathematical sort of mindset if you just think about what was I feeling there? Where did it come from?
There is, to some extent, always maths in the background, isn't there? Even if you're unsure, even if you don't know it's there.
Well, it's a very philosophical question, I guess. But I would say every process that's going in the brain can be mapped out mathematically. Yes. And even if you can't put it into words, you can't conceptualize it. If you just try, you will inevitably find patterns, and patterns are best described using math.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, just because I'm really into neuroscience and neuropsychology and, how the brain operates. And I feel like, maybe people have had a bad experience with math, at a young age or something, and then they completely shut off to it, not realizing that, like you said, you really are using math all the time, and you can improve if you put a little work into it.
I totally agree with that.
And in terms of running the site and things, how have you found that as a project? So moving away from being 100% a poker player to moving into the video making, managing the website, that sort of thing. How have you found that?
So for me, I always don't plan that far in advance, or sort of things just happen. It's just like, let's do a website. I have some cool ideas, and it's like, okay, let's do it. And then all the planning comes a little bit later. But in retrospect, I guess the way I would view it is, it's sort of the natural progression of things. Like at first you're a beginner, then you're a professional player, then you become one of the best players, and then you just naturally go into the coach direction. You run your own business, you become the manager of some sort of thing. And I see myself very slowly going up that path.
Are you able to keep some sort of good life balance? And how do you do that? Because you're playing and you're coaching and you've got the poker market.
Yes, that is a very good question. So I do spend most of my days, most of my time on doing one of those three things. Yes.
Do you think it's important to try and balance things out? Or do you see like you could get burnt out by trying to do too much, or that hasn't really factored in for you as much so far?
Well, I'm not really doing too many other things on the side, which is certainly a little bit of a problem, except for some exercising and traveling a bit. But most of the traveling is naturally poker related. But I do take my days off, and I do take my hours off. So I'm not in the, work 14 hours and then burn out after a few years sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say the traveling, obviously we've mentioned Vegas. Where else do you find yourself heading for poker?
For a while, I used to travel to all sorts of live poker tournaments within Europe. So there's the EPT, there's a lot of smaller events. Just last year, I was at the World Series of Europe in Berlin, which is actually my hometown. So that was nice going back there and then combining that with the poker playing. And yeah, there's just a lot of events all over Europe, and occasionally I'll go to some of them.
Do you find that the play is substantially better or worse in the European events versus the American events?
I don't feel qualified to answer, as I haven't played that huge a number of tournaments. It's definitely a very different feel. I think the American players, they have a different style. And for me, it is, like we talked about earlier, kind of difficult to get used to. In terms of being better, I think the professional players are pretty much the same. And the number of casual players, well, that just varies by place, like as places in the US are, of course, very different. Vegas is a dream city, obviously, but you have similar cities in Europe. And then you also have like London or so, where there's a lot of professional players that from all over Europe move to London because of the regulation. So if there's a poker event in London, that's probably not going to be too profitable.
And do you base your decision on traveling to the events, on how soft they'll be, or do you sort of decide to go to the event anyway because you plan to travel to the place?
No, more the latter thing. So I'm feeling like, okay, I have been, inside my apartment for 2 weeks straight. Let's go out to play some tournaments and travel. So that, and then of course it factors in, well, do I like the city? Do I like the place? And is there going to be a good value tournament? But not so much. That's more secondary.
You're kind of unusual in a way because, we have a lot of guests on the show that come down very much like I'm a cash player or I'm an MTT player. And oftentimes, whichever one you are, you really don't care for the other one all that much. But it sounds like you're pretty balanced in terms of cash and MTTs.
Well, I would say I'm like at a okay level in a lot of poker variants. I can play a little bit of Omaha, I can play a little bit of fixed limit, but I would never consider myself a professional. And same thing for MTTs. I'm okay. If there's other good players, they'd acknowledge me. They wouldn't run over me. But there's only one thing which I'm really, really good at, and that's the 6 max no limit cash game.
Yeah.
And is that something where you really look for the 6 max MTTs live, or does that not really make a difference?
I do much prefer those over the full-handed ones, yes, but I don't mind too much playing the full-handed ones. That the extra couple positions, they don't make too big of a difference. They make it much more boring, but that's okay.
Now, you brought up something, so I'm going to have to ask you. Online can be very different, obviously, because, you're multi-tabling and blah, 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 and it's going very fast. But live tournaments, how do you deal with the boredom? Because that is something that comes up a lot with people, especially people who are coming from an online setting. They go, oh my God, the live tournaments are so boring.
Right. So I've tried different things. So some people read books on the side or listen to some audiobooks or perhaps even just listen to music. It doesn't work for me. Not my type of thing. I can't concentrate on two things at once at all. Doesn't work. Then I've tried the just don't do anything. Just sit there and look straight at the table and try to zone in. Also doesn't work for me. What works for me is taking detailed note on everything that happens. So I'm on my smartphone as a nerd would be, and I'm typing what's going on in every single hand in sort of a quick note-taking sort of style. How big did the person bet? How did they move their chips? I'll try to just write down as much information as possible. That doesn't get boring as you start to pay detailed attention to what people are doing. You'll see more stuff than you can possibly write down. And that doesn't get boring, plus probably maximize your expectation because the more information you take in, the more you can process it.
Oh, and by the end, if you get to the late stages of a tournament, you must have an enormous amount of information.
Yes. I do delete them after a while.
Well, that must come in very handy, though, as you go deep. If you, end up getting on a final table with somebody you've got a lot of notes on, you definitely are going to have an edge there.
Yes, it's not as handy as you might think. A lot of the notes are just like random information and it doesn't really help you. But I've occasionally found something in the notes, like a pattern that I wouldn't have noted otherwise, and that can be extremely useful.
And the plans for this year? Are you going to be out at the World Series again?
I haven't booked my flights or hotel yet, but I plan to be there in July, at least play the main event, maybe some other stuff we'll have to see. So yes, I'll be there. If you're in Vegas, feel free to hit me up.
We'll be in town for a bit, won't we, Trisha? Are you going to do the whole thing again, Trisha, this year? Or?
I always do. I'm a glutton for punishment. Now, I'm going to ask you just to dig a little deep. What's the best piece of poker advice you ever got?
I actually maintain a notebook of like one-liners, two-liners sorts of advice, which are very, very useful or have pushed me forward. One thing I always recite is that it was a post on 2+2, just a normal hand history discussion, people posting things and saying all sorts of things. And one person, I'm not sure who was, but he said, well, but what hand do you expect your opponent to bluff with here? And up to that point, I never really thought about that. I just thought about, I think he's bluffing, but I never really thought about with which hands. And that for me at that point in time was like, oh my God, suddenly I see the thing so much clearer.
Isn't it amazing the difference just some little thing like that can make to you in your game?
Yes, for sure. So you always think about, which hands beat me, but I never really thought about which hands don't beat me in a sense. So yeah, definitely those.
Yeah.
And yeah, I write those small things down and I go over them every once in a while.
So is that going to be a book you publish in 15 years' time? Like the two-liners that can change your game.
Yeah. Publishing a book would be awesome, but it's so much work. I admire people who publish books.
It is a lot of work, but don't underestimate. You may have one already just, if you've collected up enough poker wisdom and advice, you might already have one there.
Right. Now, I see some of the Slansky books, which are just short novels, short excerpts. I guess I could do something like that. But writing like a real book with a, table of contents and going from chapter to chapter, that takes a lot of planning.
That it does.
Yeah, you're going through it again at the moment, aren't you, Trisha? Have you guys finished that one, or are you nearly there?
Almost done. We just got a couple final chapters to work on. So the vast majority of it is done.
Perfect. Out for the World Series?
Yes, it will be out in time for the World Series. It's called Peak Poker Performance, and Jonathan Little joined me again. And so we've got all sorts of exciting psychological mental game material for people coming soon.
Exciting.
Yeah, well, I'll make her send you a copy. Cool.
Yes, definitely.
So when you're doing the video series, do you plan out the whole video series first, or are you making videos of just a session that you're playing? Is it sort of structured as a course, or more just a watching and talking through the things that you're utilizing at the time?
It sort of depends on the incentive structure. A lot of the online video making incentive structure is that you get paid on a per video basis, and you want to have most of the video content as a standalone thing. You don't really want them refer to each other and, go back to what I said in chapter 2.4, that doesn't really work for online videos, does it? But I do sell a few packages on Poker Market, and one of them is actually a 5-part series, which is very detailed, has like a lot of interconnected stuff. It's like first we talk about this and then that. So I do that as well. But the vast majority of the content is just one-off concepts or one-off live plays or one-off hand review sort of things.
So that's pretty interesting. If people want to go over to thepokermarket.com, can they pay with PayPal?
Yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, so we have multiple payment methods which are accepted. Of course, PayPal, and then we accept Bitcoin and Neteller. And we also have an on-site currency which is called Poker Market tokens, which you can earn for completing certain activities on the site, such as signing up with partners, posting in the forums. So if you're just active on the site without spending any money, you can still get access to the content.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's a concept we cooked up. I hope people like that, or they do like it.
Yeah, I think they will.
Excellent. And where can they find you on things like, are you on Twitter and Facebook and things like that as well?
Somewhat active on Twitter. I don't tweet too regularly, but I check it almost every day. Best way to get in contact is on the pokermarket.com website, and then just click on coaches. There's a list of coaches, and I think I'm usually placed at the top, so there's a little bit self-advertising. And on there you can find the information like email and so on. I do have a Twitter handle, but it's probably best to link it instead of spell it.
Oh, okay. What we'll do is, we'll add that to the page. So, anyone who wants links through to Paul's stuff, we'll have all of those links up for you afterwards.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really interesting. And if people want to learn how to play poker better, they definitely should go check out pokermarket.com.
I would be advising the same. Yes.
Excellent. Well, good to hear from you, Paul, and we'll see you in Vegas.
All right. Thank you very much for the interview.
Cheers. Bye. So it's great to have Paul on the show. I liked some of the stuff he was saying there, especially about the difficulty in getting out of the micro stakes, which I think some people really aren't quite aware of just how hard that can be.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of people talking about that for whatever reason. And so the fact that he was able to point it to, hey, the people that you're playing against are actually tougher than what you might think. And B, the rake is so high. Those are probably two factors that most people don't really consciously associate with the micro stakes or the small stakes.
I mean, the thing is, if you're breaking even, you might actually be beating the tables by 10 big blinds per 100. So you're actually a pretty strong player by breaking even against your opposition at the table. It's just, you really have to be very strong to then build the bankroll to move up to that next level.
And he was very subtle in the way he talked about it, but he actually does a lot around the mindset because, he talked about his bankroll management. He talked about sleep, exercise, and diet. He talked about, mindset being fundamental. So he wasn't over the top with it, but he is definitely, a subscriber to the idea that mindset is fundamental to playing great poker.
And I think that's something we noticed that nearly, all of the high stakes, the successful players, whether or not they're calling it mindset, they do find themselves naturally doing those things that are most optimal. And obviously, these things do make a difference. If you have to have the proper bankroll management, you have to be able to control your emotions and things like diet, exercise, sleep. As he said, I think he put it well, that's how to be a good human alone. And being physically healthy just in general is going to help you with any activity, including poker.
And another thing I really do want to call out was how he said you have to set up a very rigid learning schedule for yourself if you're going to learn the game. And he talked about having like those goals and your learning plans. And I think a lot of people do approach it sort of haphazardly. And so I like that he called out that, no, you have to really dedicate yourself to it.
Yeah, it doesn't happen by chance. Certainly not if you want to get to the higher levels of the game. It's really important. I think we've said in the past that the 7 to 10 hours a week should be where serious players are looking to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say if you're just starting out, it needs to be more than that. But as you're starting to develop, I think that is the sweet spot, that 7 to 10 hours a week.
Excellent. So, Tricia, where can people find out about you and your products?
They can go over to drtriciacardner.com where they can sign up and even get a free video. And I have articles over there as well that they can read. And they can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Tricia Cardner.
And if anyone wants to see information about me, my MP3s, or my coaching, head to pokermindcoach.com. We look forward to talking to you guys next week.
Awesome. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Elliot Rowe and Dr. Tricia Gardner. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.